Video 51S. This is serious and it's on housing. Good morning. It's the 31st of January 2023 and it's a good bright morning, and I'm a farmer and I have work ongoing and I have to keep my phone on. Please excuse me if it rings. Now, this is on housing, and an article that was published, it's 51S, an article was published on the Mail on Sunday, in the last Sunday gone by Valerie Hanlon. An article in the Mail on Sunday by Valerie Hanlon. And she says that the government is scapegoating the dysfunctional planning system. In other words, it's the planning objectors and people who object and people who take part in the planning system who are to blame for the chaos in the housing crisis. Okay, as if they would build them whether there was planning or not. Now, one-off houses can be built under the Planning and Development Act, and indeed small housing schemes likewise, but when you go into building any considerable amount of housing, by right they require an environmental impact assessment at local level. If they're part of a government plan and programme on housing, they require a strategic environmental assessment carried out under the SEA Directive of 2004. The government doesn't do it right. They don't do it at all for some things like onshore wind, and that's an ongoing point, but there's no proper plan for housing, which the directive requires. Now, what they're actually saying is, what the writer is saying is to conceal their own failure, to deal with the housing crisis. Now, the thing about housing is you have to actually plan it, you have to actually excavate the earth, you have to get the land. Apart from planning at all, you then have to go and build them, you have to get the mixers out. And we all know in Ireland what happens when the paddy goes to build, when the Irishman goes to build, the paddy whackery starts straight away, and the cowboys get going, just as they do with the energy, the wind energy and all that. Now, the Social Democrats TD, member of the Irish Parliament, he's Cian O'Callaghan, and he says that the intention is to make everything faster. So he seems to be sort of for it, to make everything faster. But government is exposing itself to a risk. And this is like if you're doing something illegal and you go to rock the boat in any way, you expose yourself to the risk of being caught. You expose yourself to the risk of being caught. So if you build a factory with no planning permission and no one notices it, and then you go to build on some other thing and you get planning permission, the question arises, where is the permission for the original factory? That's kind of what he's saying. Now, he says it could end up in the Court of Justice of the EU. And I and a few others, and particularly myself, have spotted years and years ago that there's no SEA done, that the directive is not complied with. Myself and my friend Pat Swords have cases. We didn't always win. Sweden and Holland are in with Pat Swords' help, and so is Ireland, in the Court of Justice to stop the European Investment Bank giving money to projects without them being assessed, which is the law. And this terrifies government. They want to commit crimes, essentially. They want to break the law. The Aarhus Convention clearly says the public have a right to take part in planning. Now, they say that delays in planning. So if people go to the European Court of Justice to fight the department, it will delay planning, and that is certainly true. The time to do this was in 2013. That's 10 years ago. I stood up in the Chester Beatty Library, and I might find the video yet, and I said you must do the SEA for wind, but you must do the SEA for everything. And in the case of housing, you can amend it and modify it. And they could have done it and decide where they're going to build, what they're going to build, and what the overall strategy is. Is it right to be building everything in the good land of Meath and Dublin and Kildare? Why don't they have, where they're resettling people who are not connected to the area, why don't they move them a bit more down country? Why not move them to a way out, like places like Clare, Tipperary, Roscommon, Leitrim, Sligo and all that. Why not distribute them more? These are issues where the SEA would have to look at, and they don't want to face that, but they have to face it. Now he said, the department then was consulted by the writer. The department was consulted by Valerie Hanlon. The housing spokesman said the bill proposed a scheme of cost protection for citizens due in JR. But the bill also has a plan to cut out people that don't have what they decide an interest. So at the moment, a person from France can object to a house in Ireland if it's an EIA or a housing plan. A person from Russia could technically object. And if you took an example of a person, maybe a boy, who grew up beside a Neolithic dolmen in Sligo, an old type burial chamber, and he saw it bulldozed with no problem in 1980, and now he sees an application to bulldoze one in County Cork, he presently can object, and he can quote his own experience of seeing this happen and what was done to our heritage, and say that's why it shouldn't be granted permission in County Cork. That's the law. The public have the right to be informed when all options are open, the right to make their contribution. Their contribution must be taken into account, and where the planner decides otherwise, to give reasons for the decision. That reason must be subject to judicial review in the High Court, with appeal to the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, and right up to the European Court of Justice. That's what happened in Belgium with case C 2419 for the wind energy guidelines there. So what he's now saying is they're going to give extra bit of protection. At the moment, each side pays their own cost in an environmental law case. I was there several times. You have to pay your own costs, and I got around that by doing it myself. But the problem is that limits you. If you want to go into the European Court of Justice, you have to get lawyers, which isn't strictly democratic either, but that's the way it is. So what they're going to do is they're going to give a bit extra help for those who qualify, who they believe has a right to make a submission, and the rest can hump off. The rest won't get in there. And clearly you can see that that's a breach of the Aarhus Convention, the SEA Directive, and Article 6 of the EIA Directive, which I've just read out. Okay? So the government is going to ride roughshod over the treaty on the founding of the European Union, the Lisbon Treaty, which guaranteed us these rights, and all European law and the European Court of Justice. That's what they're going to try. And hope that people won't have the money to challenge them. Now there's a case going on with Friends of the Irish Environment number 727 of 2022, and we'll see how that goes. They're challenging the whole plan and programme for climate change in Ireland that has never been assessed. You can imagine Eamon Ryan starting such a plan or programme, and you can imagine the dysfunctional civil service that he rules over trying it. They wouldn't stand a chance, and they know that. The Parliament spokesman says the bill will bring increased clarity. Yes, it will. It will clarify that the likes of me have no right to make a submission on a wind farm maybe built on the hill of Tara. That's what they're actually planning. Now, he also makes the point that judicial reviews account for only 0.26%. That's tiny of overall planning. And this is very important because viewers should understand that I am not a serial objector. I have never objected to houses beside me or anything else. Where there is any problem with housings, I get on to the builder and try and get it fixed around and twisted to suit me. Big estates have gone up where I have property, and I never objected. And if I did, I withdrew my objection when I got it fixed. So we're not serial objectors. We are protecting the environment. And there is a lot of effort there by the media confusing this. Like, I don't see anything about this on the journal.ie, which is the only media I read. And the Mail on Sunday is the only newspaper which will make any effort to try and inform the public, and that's why I'm doing it. So what they're trying to do is say that to take a judicial review, you have to have an interest. You have to have an interest. So in the case of the Rah wind farm beside my farm in Kingscourt, I would have an interest, surely. That would be all right. But I have no interest to do Tahart, which is a few miles away, or to your worker. And had I had time to take an interest into your worker, it could never be built because it was never appealed to Burklenana. So they're trying to remove my right to do that and the rights of others. Okay. So what it's like at the moment is, it's like if they bought a green field, got planning permission for a pub, but didn't get a public license, public house license, and tried to run it as a pub. So if children go in there at 11 o'clock at night and they're only age 10, there's nothing the Gardaí can do because it's not a licensed premises. The Gardaí have to move and close it down. It has no license. So the same with the housing, town and country planning. It's an unlicensed drinking premises. So to go over it again, the law is all the countries, mostly of the world, agreed to the Aarhus Convention on public participation on decision making. The EU introduced the SCA directive 201/42/EC. It then introduced the EIA directive 211/92/EC as amended in 2014. The SCA directive is for the public plan or programme or modifications to it. Public plan or programme or modifications to it. It has to be done with participation of all the interested parties like on Tashka and all that, but also the John public, the ordinary Joe Soap. And that includes the public everywhere. It could be a person living in Britain that has an interest in archaeological objects and might point out that there is a link between that area and two other, we'd say, dolmens or passage tombs or something else. It gives the right of everybody. It's inclusive. You have the right then, when you take a judicial review, to have cost protection against the cost of the other side due to certain conditions. You have the right to do that. They can't come after you for your costs, subject to certain conditions. And once you do that, you can battle away. You can go to the High Court as your own, up to the Supreme Court, but you can't go to the European Court of Justice, which I would like to see amended. So, the overarching planner programme is the SCA directive. There's nothing done for onshore wind energy. And if there is anything for town and country planning, it needs to be modified and updated to take account of the current situation. It's not that big a process, but it requires the input from engineers and experts. Okay. Then when you have that done, the SCA sets the framework for future planning consent for projects under the EIA directive. That's the local EIA directive. And you cannot do the local EIA directive unless there's the SCA. Okay. The same way as you Gardaí cannot prosecute a pub for having young people on the premises after 11 o'clock at night unless there is a license on the pub. Okay, so the EIA then is to assess the local effects. The national effects are already taken account, and the transboundary effects, maybe involving Northern Ireland, have to be looked at as well, and they have to have a say. All of that is being swept aside, and then you have the Planning and Development Act, which carries it along. Okay, so they're planning to oust the ordinary person unless they're directly beside it. They're planning to put them out. And that's a breach of European law, and that's going to force me to head into the High Court the minute they do it and challenge them and say you cannot do that. And I am entitled to a protective cost order because it's under one of the directives, the EIA directive. I'm entitled to a protective cost order by being shut out like that. So it is dysfunctional. The whole thing is an unholy mess. All they had to do was sit down a few years ago and start doing it for all the industries. And that includes them all. Agriculture, fisheries, forestry, energy. Now, some people, you'll hear them saying that, oh, you're only blocking progress. Well then, would they like a house to be built beside them without planning permission? Would they like a public house or a dance hall to be built beside them without proper planning permission? You see, it's everyone says, oh, I don't want this, until it comes to their own door, and then they want it. The money that these county councils are getting and the Bord Pleanála, which has been itself found to be corrupt, is outrageous. I think they're planning a new Bord Pleanála a planning commission or something with a new name. Why didn't they manage the one they had? Why didn't they appoint the right people to it? Why did they allow corruption? Where does that leave existing things that are built? This is a mess. When you have an illegality in a thing, it's a mess. Now we know, they believe, and the Irish politicians are programmed to believe, and the civil service, that Irish law is all that counts. But they're slowly but surely discovering that it's European law counts, whether they like the European or whether I do or not. That's the way the European law demands it be done. You assess the plan or programme, you have to get the means wherever or whatever. And when you have that done, you compile an environmental report, piece of paper, an environmental report. That environmental report is subject to judicial review, and if it could be changed by judicial review, it could be quashed. Then they got to get it right. When they have the environmental report, that's the document. That's it. You then come along, and when you're applying for your build a new town, you want this, that, and the other. This sets out all that should be in that town. For example, the present government would build a town, and they'd put no infrastructure. They'd put no schools. And so when people would occupy it to start, it'd be lovely. 2, 3, 4 years, everything would be peaceful. Be an election. People would say, oh, I got a house. The next thing, the children would rise to the age of 4. And then they'd want to know where's the school. And there's no school. This is the kind of ignorance and stupidity that the present coalition government, and I don't know if Sinn Féin is any better, are up to. This is what they're doing. And that's why the SEA, the environmental report, would say there has to be a school if there's a certain population. There has to be provision for that. And so when they go in for the EIA, that would have to be in it. And if they tried to build it without a school, I could run off into the High Court and stop them. Now, is that unreasonable? Is really that terrible? Am I that big a monster for that basic level of common sense that I apply around my farm every day of the week, and you and I do in our daily lives? Surely that's not too much task. They don't want it. They don't want it. And people are waking up. There's no doubt the European Court of Justice will demand it be done if it can get its hands on it. It's already did it in 24/19. So folks, that's it. We'll see you back. I hope I haven't left anything out. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and you see the way they have made such a mess of everything by failing to comply with the right things. You would not have Eamon Ray and a bicycle salesman ruling on wind energy. You'd have an engineer. You'd have the people who run the power stations. You'd have access to go in and check them. You'd have the data. You'd have the engineering reports. You'd look at other people. People from Holland and America might be able to say, this is the reality. This is what we found. He doesn't want that with his renewable energy. And the Irish government ministers, they don't want it when it comes to town and country planning. Why doesn't Cian O'Callaghan TD agree with that? Why can he not agree with it? Because he's an independent TD, or he's Social Democrats. I don't think they're a party, I'm not sure. Why does he not want to obey with the law? Does he not realise that's how everything is planned? I'll be probably sending this video around to a few of them. It'll get nowhere. They really do not want, the Irish Paddy government does not want to be told what to do under any circumstances. And hopefully we can keep the pressure on them. Folks, it's our environment that's at stake. We could have our people being housed. We could have the houses going up. We could have the best practice being built into them. I would put fireplaces in them. I would allow good heating systems, but I would allow fireplaces. Of course, if they try to do that, Ryan will say, no, no, no. They're the ones that's blocking it. They'll insist on real expensive things going in to comply with their green obsession. So they don't want engineers or scientists or anyone telling them what to do, and they know the public up to now will not take an interest. That could change. Thumbs up or a thumbs down, folks. We'll see you back for something else soon. Goodbye.